Alright, how you guys doing today? Welcome back to a brand new video. Hopefully you're having a beautiful day or night or whatever you're doing. Oh my god, today's topic is gonna be great! Okay, so here is how Sonic lore works. So, over the years it has been very apparent that a lot of people aren't actually into the fundamentals of Sonic lore. Now, in order to actually understand Sonic lore, we have to understand the three kinds of lore in general. You have character lore, you have world lore, and you have isolated lore. First, we're talking about character lore. Character lore is stuff like Sonic, Silver, Shadow, Tails, Knuckles, Amy. And when we talk about characters like this, we are usually talking about autobiographies or biographies or whatever you want to call it. But what matters the most is the fact that you're not actually talking about the world by itself. You're not telling us how the world got there unless the character is the reason why the world got there. So when you're talking about all this stuff, right, you're not going to say, oh yeah, the world is this way because of Iblis. No, you're not going to say that. You're going to say Silver exists in this world that was created by Iblis. These are two completely different statements, even though you're mentioning what happened to the world, right? So you're going to be basically, you're talking about the character, the world is the background element. World lore is things like the Master Emerald, the Chaos Emeralds, Dark Gaia, the Ancients, right? While they are characters, some of them, they affect the world in massive ways that you can't ignore in any way whatsoever without actually being kinda stupid, you know? You gotta look at all these parts of the lore and you have to say, oh, this is where the effectiveness of the world actually comes in. Like, the Master Emerald is on Earth to begin with. It's been there for billions of years, right? So you have the Chaos Emeralds coming from Earth in order to come and meet the Master Emerald. Then how that connects is the Dark Gaia temples, because the Dark Gaia temples were not always there, which means eventually a different civilization got a hold of the Chaos Emerald. And therefore, if you have that and that coming together, you also have to think about things like, wow, how does the Master Emerald actually affect the entire world? How do the Chaos Emeralds affect the entire world? This is what we're talking about. This is how we're taking all that stuff in and we're making the theories, we're getting all that lore together. And this is the part where the characters are in the background. You're talking mostly about the event and the characters are usually in the background affecting the world around them, right? These two things can mix together, but they don't always mix together, and that's very important for what we're going to be talking about today when we continue on. So what is isolated lore? Isolated lore is kind of hard to define because it can be multiple things. So characters that come from another reality, they are isolated lore. This is because they do not have a origin point in the current world and they don't affect it very majorly. Think about it like this. Blaze is isolated lore because she doesn't affect the current Sonic lore or Sonic lore in general in major ways. So she is still major lore. Her coming to Sonic's dimension doesn't actually increase or decrease the threat level of the world itself. So that's a isolated lore event. And by extension, the Soul Dimension is also an isolated lore pocket. So when we're talking about Blaze's world doesn't actually affect Sonic's world very majorly. Some things happen between the two, but nothing has ever actually taken those worlds and has either combined them together, has taken something from Sonic's world and has kept it in Blaze's world. There has been nothing like that. So it's still a isolated lore event because nothing from the main world that we cover or the main world that we're talking about has been affected by the lore of the other dimension, as well as white space. White space also hasn't been very much affected by Sonic lore, right? So we can count that as a isolated place. The reason why you can never count Silver's world as a isolated place because it's not a different dimension, it is a continuation of Sonic's same world. So it is affected by the characters, we just don't know how yet. And by extension, it's affected by the world itself. Obviously I didn't need to say that because you already knew that, right? Hopefully this was a pretty good explanation of different kinds of lore, but now we can actually get on to the actual thing that we need to talk about. Wait, okay, I just forgot about this. I forgot to say this. So, okay, if Silver's world is affected by Dragon Ball style logic where you create a new universe every time you go back in time and the original universe stays the same, well then you're actually taking Silver's world and turning it from a actual consistent part of the world to another one of those spaces where the world actually changes itself. So it would become a isolated lore event if it works based on Dragon Ball law. If it works on logic where you actually go back in time and you change Silver's future, then it would not be an isolated lore event. I just needed to make sure I say that because I'm not entirely sure how time travel works in Sonic, because there seems to be like 3 or 4 different ways to time travel, and I'm not sure if they all actually work the same way. Anyway, back to the regularly scheduled programming. So why did I say this in the first place? Sometimes you'll just hear someone talk about something for about 4 or 5 minutes and it doesn't actually make sense. It doesn't actually gel together. The reason why I bring this up is because back in the day when Sonic lore was actually created, or Sonic got more than just one game to actually talk about stuff, back in the day Sonic lore didn't connect very well. You would have problems going from Sonic 3 to Sonic Unleashed, and all these different problems would be small, but like when you tried to get rid of all those problems without information that we have in the modern day, you would consistently run into these problems that would make the lore seem less serious than it actually was, right? You would take every story by a per story basis instead of taking it as one big long lore exposition that would bring you to the next part of the lore and actually make you understand more about the world. You never felt like you were understanding about a world that you're already in. It felt like you were constantly seeing a new world, constantly getting those first contacts out of its belt, when really the thing that we're trying to see is how do these things connect? How do the Black Arms connect to Perfect Chaos? How do the Ancients and Chaos connect? How does electricity inside of robots actually visualize on the creatures itself? And how does the things like Silver's future and Blaze's dimension actually work out when interacting with each other? So when we're going through stuff like this and we're actually now getting those lore connections, it actually makes the lore make a lot more sense. Let me give you some examples. A thing that Ian Flynn, the writer of the current Sonic games, really wants to establish before he leaves, a thing that he really wants to get out of the way and establish, is that Perfect Chaos and T-Call are both connected and still protecting the Master Emerald whenever Knuckles leaves the planet. This could solve so many things from different games where Knuckles appears, which he shouldn't be at because he should be connecting or protecting the Master Emerald. So another good connection is the connection between the Ancients and Chaos. A reason that we always had this different kind of lore perspective before is because we thought that the form that Chaos had more of a symbolic meaning, right? A thing that we always thought is that Chaos's form was meant to represent the fact that he got pushed around as a Chow, and once he got mutated beyond belief, he was more of a dangerous threat, but you could still see the negativity and how all the problems that the Echidna tribe caused them while they were still living around the tribe was showing on the actual creature itself. Now that we know this isn't actually the case, in the cases that he looked like this previously if he was born like a million years earlier, now we can actually spend a lot more time connecting those things together and understanding, hey, the Master Emerald actually mutated Chaos from a Chow, but his ancestors were also mutated from the Ancients into Chow. So these two things that you didn't think existed, or we didn't have proof existed yet, are actually more connected than we think. And there's a bunch of little connections like this all around the Sonic universe that just are now recently getting those bigger connections. My favorite new connection, and one that really encapsulates is the coolness that the Sonic lore can actually have is the connection between Dark Gaia and the Ancients. The reason why this is so cool is because we know that the Chaos Emeralds weren't always on Earth, so now there's a whole bunch of theories about how Dark Gaia was actually sealed for so long, and every time he unreleases, how does Light Gaia, otherwise known as Chip the dog, get back at Dark Gaia and re-traps him before the Chaos Emeralds get introduced to the planet? Is he using the Master Emerald? Is he just finding the Master Emerald, putting him back in that way? It's so cool. And like, if we get an Unleashed remaster and they don't answer that question, I'm going to be very livid, because how do you actually go back to Unleashed with the information in Sonic Frontiers and not have those questions, not have new questions about it? Like, Sonic is getting really, really good with its lore, and everything is starting to connect together. And I know not everybody likes it when Sonic connects together all the time and all that stuff, and we do need those isolated lore events so we can have those solo stories and stuff like that, where it's just about the characters and the lore doesn't have to make as much sense in those certain contexts. But like, it's so much fun. Have a great day. Remember, the Sonic lore is great, okay? It's actually getting really good, and you need to be along for the ride, okay? We're covering Sonic lore for the long haul. This is just a little break in order to make sure that you know all the things that I'm thinking about when it comes to this.